Dear participants, welcome to fourth day of this STC. So I hope you are learning many new things in this STC. So today in the first session, we have with us Professor Sandeep Singh Gill, who is STC coordinator also. Professor Gill is an experienced professor and consultant, currently heading the ECE department at NITR Chandigarh. A PhD from NIT Hamirpur, he is a multidisciplinary expert with research and consultancy focus in blending areas of VLSI design, engineering management, quality enhancement, branding, restructuring, and development of institutions and industry. His 26 years of professional experience includes stints in industry, startups, and academia, including Wipro Limited and Guru Nanak Dev Engineering College, Ludhiana. Among the many academic and administrative responsibilities, he has been Dean Administration, Dean Academic, Head of Department, Chairman of He also has five book and book chapters and four technical proceedings to his credit. He has been invited to and presented papers in international conferences in Rome, Mauritius, UAE, and Thailand. Besides this, he has published papers in international conferences in Chengdu, Shanghai, Lahore, and Romania. He was also member city level technical subcommittee, Ludhiana Smart City Project, besides being a technical member in committees in many government departments. As a consultant and researcher, he has been involved in numerous studies and has done over 44 lakhs of capacity enhancement work under World Bank projects for capacity enhancement and skill development this year only, as well as he has also been involved in testing the efficacy of project-based online learning. So now I invite Professor Gill to take up today's session and continue his deliberations.
Thank you, Professor Pariwal. Dear participants, over the last 3 days, you have been exposed to most of the theory and the practice of outcome-based education and the various things which are basically required before you think of applying for a NBA accreditation. You were exposed to a vision, how to develop a vision, mission, PEOs and all that in the first session by Dr. Patnaik. While doing that, he also covered your criteria number 1. Then in the second session, Professor Tulsi, she taught about Bloom's taxonomy, teaching learning processes. So all these things are required while filling your SAR. Yesterday you had a session, day before yesterday you had a session in which you learned about developing the COs and their mapping with POs and PSOs. Professor Dhaliwal taught you about rubrics, how to frame them, what are the requirements in designing a good rubrics. Yesterday again, Professor Grover was there to help you understand about calculation of attainment of COs, POs and PSOs. Then Dr. Meenakshi Sood, she taught about examinations and how to go about it, certain latest practices or reforms which can be inculcated in an examination process. So after all this grinding, now what you are left with is actually going in for applying for a NBA program. So today we'll just go through certain basics of what is involved in an NBA accreditation process. Then we'll go in for a pre-qualifier form awareness, and then we'll go in for the first 4 criteria, how to fill those. So that is what we'll be doing in the first session. In the second session today by Dr. Srinivas, you will be going for the other criteria which are left. So as you must be aware by now, NBA was set up in 1994. And the basic aim was to assess the qualitative competence of the programs offered by technical institutions. NBA is applicable to diploma level institutions. It is applicable to UG, that is engineering. It is also applicable to MTechs. Besides that, NBA also assesses programs like MBAs, pharmacy, architecture, and such like disciplines which are basically covered by AICT. So when it came into existence, it was part of AICT. Later on, in 2010, it was made an independent autonomous body. In April 2013, it was made completely independent in the sense that the financial as well as the administrative setup was absolutely independent from AICT now. Whatever slight relationship it had, that was also removed. So as of now, it is an independent body and it works closely with all stakeholders to ensure that the programs which are offered in different professional institutes like engineering or management or pharmacy or architecture, those programs are equipped to help our graduates be a useful outcome of the 4-year or a 3-year or a 2-year learning process which they have gone through, so that they can contribute to the society. So that is what basically NBA is looking at. If you talk about the governance structure of NBA, as defined in its memorandum of association, there is a general council at the top, then there is an executive council, then there is an academic advisory committee. So all these committees are chaired by the chairman of NBA, and the member secretary of the NBA is the member secretary of all these committees, and he is basically the executive authority of NBA. Day-to-day functioning is taken care of by the member secretary. Other committees or subcommittees which are very important in NBA, there is a subcommittee of Academic Advisory Committee of Engineering and Technology Functions. So this subcommittee basically is there to evolve standards for assessment and accreditation. It also forms assessors panels. It lays down guidelines for assessors, those who come to your institutes to assess your institute, how they should go about their processes. And it evaluates and approves the recommendation of the Evaluation and Accreditation Committee. The Evaluation and Accreditation Committee basically reviews the reports of the evaluation team and submits its recommendations on accreditation to the subcommittee of AAC. So once a team comes to you in your institute, that team submits its report. There's a chairman and there are normally 2 members for each program which come to you, the institute. If you have 5 programs being accredited together, then you're likely to receive 11 people, 5 into 2 plus 1 chairman of the whole team. That team then submits its evaluation and report to the Evaluation and Accreditation Committee. This committee formulates its recommendations and those go to the subcommittee of AAC of Engineering and Technology Functions. Now, suppose once you have been given the result, you are not satisfied with it. You were expecting a full accreditation, you were given a provisional accreditation, or it could be that you were not given any accreditation. You can go in for an appeal. There is an appellate committee also which considers the appeal applications made by the institutions against the decision on accreditation of a program. So these appellate committee and its recommendations based upon your representation, that is again given to the Academic Advisory Committee. Today, what I will do is, I will focus on Tier 1 institutions while we go through the SAR, because Tier 1 institute is basically having certain additional features. Whatever is there in Tier 2, it is being covered in Tier 1 SAR, but a couple of additional weightages here and there are there because it is an institute which can formulate its own curriculum. So what exactly is a Tier 1 institution? All IITs, all triple ITs and these NITs, they are all part of the Tier 1. Then central universities are also considered to be part of Tier 1. State universities, again, private universities which are there, all are part of Tier 1. Then deemed to be universities are also part of the Tier 1. Besides that, any institute which has been declared autonomous by either UGC or the affiliating university, that is also part of the Tier 1 institute. Now, what is common in all these? The common thing in all these institutes is that these institutions have complete freedom to design, develop, and update curricula, and also have complete academic autonomy. So that is the prerequisite. If you are falling in a category where you can design your own curricula, you are having complete academic autonomy, then you can get yourself assessed in Tier 1. Another important thing is, which we need to understand, is that there is something called Washington Accord. India as of now is a signatory to that. Washington Accord is basically an international multilateral agreement among bodies responsible for accrediting undergraduate engineering degree programs. So it is basically focused on undergraduate engineering degree programs. Postgraduate programs are not part of the Washington Accord. Started in 1989 as a accord of 6 countries, and subsequently numerous other companies have been joining it. India basically through NBA became a provisional member of the Washington Accord in 2007. Basic thing is that NBA became a provisional member. Washington Accord doesn't get you into a permanent signatory status until and unless it is convinced that your processes, your way of assessing is in consonance with the practices which Washington Accord professes for its signatories. So what is the advantage of becoming a permanent signatory? Once you are part of the Washington Accord, your programs which are accredited under Tier 1 NBA, they become equivalent. They are considered to be equivalent in all the signatory countries. So your portability of your program increases. If you are doing your BTech, which is Tier 1 accredited in India, it would be substantially equivalent to a BTech in US, which is if that institute is part of the Washington Accord. So that is the most important part, and which as of now we should be very clear that except for a few institutes, and even in IITs, what we have seen is that except for a few branches, admissions are a difficult issue. People are not ready to take courses which they don't consider, except for circuit branches. Admission, getting good students for admission in even the top institutes is a difficult scenario today. So while looking at the advantages of going in for NBA, the most important advantage we have is that if we are a Tier 1 NBA program, you can market yourself to your prospective clients, that is the students looking to take admission, so that they are sensitized to the fact that their degree as a Tier 1 program which they were entered would be portable. It will be recognized in most of the countries which normally students want to go to after degree. So in 2014, India became a permanent signatory. The basic thing which we need to understand is that only programs of Tier 1 institutions are accredited by NBA are eligible for mutual recognition. So Tier 2 is not part of the Washington Accord. Postgraduate courses are not part of the Washington Accord. So when we go in for looking for accreditation, what is the general information? NBA, there is something called NAAC also. Most of you would be knowing that NAAC is for the institute or the university as a whole. NBA is for a program, and program does not mean electronics engineering or civil engineering department. It means BTech in electronics engineering or BTech in computer science or BTech in civil engineering or MTech in civil engineering. So that is a program, a single program. A department may have 4 programs, but when you apply based upon a single program as a unit. Then institutions are required to apply for accreditation through eNBA portal as per norms prescribed by NBA from time to time. Once programs to be accredited are offered by an educational institution, you should be sure that those programs are formally approved by AICTE or the concerned regulatory authority. Only those programs can be assessed which are approved by AICTE or the concerned regulatory authority, which means that if it is a university department which wants to go in for accreditation, they may not have AICTE approval, but that university would be UGC approved. So that can also suffice. Another important thing is that programs from which at least 2 batches of students have graduated are considered for accreditation. So that means that if you are going in for a BTech course of engineering for accreditation, you need to have that course running for 5 years. 5 years would mean that you have 1 batch passing out at the end of the 4th year and the second batch passing out at the end of the 5th year. So you have at least 2 batches which have passed out. If you are looking at a PG program, you should apply after 3 years of starting of that program, so that you have at least 2 batches passing out, 1 at the end of the 2nd year and the 2nd at the end of the 3rd year. If you are an autonomous institute, at least 1 batch of students must have passed out under the autonomous status for the institute to be taken up for accreditation under Tier 1. Suppose you are becoming an autonomous institute in 2020, so you need to take care that at least 1 autonomous batch, 1 batch admitted under the autonomous status where you were able to revise your own curriculum and do your own academic assessments and all that, that should have passed out. So autonomous status in 2020 would mean that at least your institute or the course may be running since say 1970, but you got autonomy in 2020. You can go in for NBA accreditation in 2021, 22, 23 under Tier 2. But if you want to go for accreditation under Tier 1, you need to wait till 2024 when the first batch of autonomous students under autonomy would be passing out. So that you need to take care. So when you get the autonomous status, you can apply in Tier 2 in the interim period. But if you wish to go in for Tier 1, you need to wait until 1 batch passes out under the autonomous status. So autonomy, like I've told you earlier also, it could be from the UGC or from the affiliating university. Only thing is that you need to make sure that your autonomy is giving you complete academic autonomy. There are no ifs, buts in that. Then institute needs to pay accreditation fee also to NBA. So initially you need to pay 10% at the time of submission of pre-qualifier. There is a document called pre-qualifier which is submitted first with 10% fee. Once AICTE assesses that you are eligible prima facie based upon the pre-qualifier, you are allowed to pay the balance fee, and then you can submit your SAR and pay the balance fee after your pre-qualifier approval comes through. The SAR or the self-assessment report is also submitted online through the eNBA portal in the prescribed format. We will go through that format today. Title of a program to be accredited must be the same as shown on the graduating student's degree and approval letters of the concerned regulatory authority. When you are applying for accreditation, for example, you are running a BTech in electronics and electrical communication as per AICTE approval. But while applying you write electronics and communication engineering. That is not right. It should be in consonance. Same name should be used as in the AICTE approval and as being pasted on the students' degrees. While coming to your institute, if you are running 2 shifts, certain institutes are running 2 shifts. That was under a policy by AICTE, wherein optimum utilization of resources was being promoted. So under that, the team would be looking at overlapping of resources in faculty. So you need to take care that that overlapping is within the given norms, as well as you are even despite overlapping, you are able to conform to the requirements of getting of the faculty or the facilities which are required. So that thing will be looked at by them very closely. You need to take care of that. Part-time programs are not considered for accreditation. Programs are evaluated in accordance with the accreditation criteria as specified by NBA, the first 4 points of which we will be discussing today. Institutions are required to represent the accreditation status of each program accurately and without ambiguity. If accreditation is withdrawn or discontinued or expires, the institution should no longer refer to the program as accredited. Why this is important is many institutes, even after their accreditation lapses, they continue to claim that they are accredited. Again, they continue to claim that the institution is NBA accredited, whereas the factual situation is that only a program can be accredited. The institute cannot be NBA accredited. You can be NAAC accredited as an institute, but you will be NBA accredited in terms of a program. So that status should be accurately put on your website or wherever you want to use it, and any non-conformity is taken very seriously if it is reported to NBA. Normally, there is a 2 or 3 days on-site visit as part of the accreditation process. The team is appointed by NBA and they carry out the evaluation process. Institutes normally are asked to propose 5 sets of dates, and those sets of dates should be when regular classes and academic activities are going on. You can't have accreditation during summer break or when the institute is closed for students. The students and any normal activity which goes on in a running institute, that should be available for the team to assess. Normally they come on Friday, Saturday they stay, and Monday morning after the exit meeting they go, Sunday morning. So institutions have an option of withdrawing a program during the exit meeting. That Sunday morning meeting, which is also called the exit meeting, in that meeting, the team, the members, they informally or they share whatever they have seen during their 2 days assessment, the strengths and the weaknesses of the department, what they like, what they feel should be taken care of. That comment or that assessment is also given by the chairman for the institute's programs, overall common facilities and all that. That kind of feedback is given by the chairman for those. Based upon that, you are allowed to think over and decide whether you want to withdraw or whether you want to go ahead with the accreditation process. So if you feel that comments coming are such that you may be refused accreditation, you have an option of withdrawing. So once during that exit meeting you say that you are withdrawing, you won't be assessed. If you say you want to continue, whatever the result, that will come before you after that process of various committees is completed. So the final decision is communicated to the educational institution together with the comments detailing strengths, weaknesses, and the scope for improvement. That document comes to you, and a copy of the report of the visiting team is also sent to the institution. along with the accreditation status in order to maintain the transparency. Which expert has written what, that comes to you. So in event of change of the decision from the visiting committee to the decision-making team, the reasons for changes are also conveyed, because we see there is a three-tier system. There is a team coming, then it goes to one committee, goes to the second committee. The status may change, especially in marginal cases. There are chances of the status changing while going through this process, where your marks are on the margins. So if you are not satisfied with the decision, you may appeal in the appellate committee within 30 days of receipt of the communication. Now, another thing is that in case of the expert visiting team to an institution, if that visit is conducted between 1st July to 31st December, the period of accreditation would commence from the ongoing academic year. That is with effect from 1st July. So suppose the team comes in October and you get accredited, your accreditation status would start from 1st July of that very year. But if the team is coming from 1st January to 30th June, then the accreditation would start from the next academic year, that is with effect from 1st July again. So 1st July is when it starts. If it is during the second part of the year, it is preponed, your status starts in a preponed way from 1st July. If it is in the first part of the year, it starts from 1st July, that is, it is starts a couple of months or 1 month or 4 months, whatever the time later. So that is how it is calculated in terms of accreditation period. If you are refused accreditation or if you withdraw during the visit, during that exit meeting, you can apply again after 1 year. Now we'll come to certain accreditation criteria. As you have already been exposed during the previous lectures, there are 10 criteria. And the first criteria is vision, mission, and program educational objectives. This was very comprehensively handled by Dr. Patnaik in the very first lecture. So any engineering program to be accredited or re-accredited should have its published vision, mission, and program educational objectives. Vision mission is something like already discussed by Dr. Patnaik, which helps the program to define the aspirations and to remain focused. And what is important is that your vision and mission for the institute and the vision and mission for the program should be aligned. That is something which is very critical. They should be aligned, and the team would, vision and mission, everybody would be able to formulate. But that alignment part would be something which should be looked into by the team very critically. Then PEOs, again, you've been talking about those since the last 3 days. They are the statements that describe what the graduates are expected to perform and achieve during the first few years after graduation. And they may be guided by global or local needs, vision of the institution, the long-term goals, and etc. etc. So various stakeholders of the program. Who are the stakeholders of the program? The students, the teachers, the management, the affiliating bodies, the professional bodies, the industry, all these are stakeholders. The professional societies which are aligned with your program. For example, if it is an electrical engineering course or electronics engineering course, IEEE could be a professional society. So all these stakeholders are involved in the process while defining the POs. And while framing the POs, we should take care that it should generally reflect on the professional accomplishments, continuing education attitudes in the first few years after their graduation. It should also be consistent with the mission of the institute. All the stakeholders should participate. Number of POs should be manageable. It should be based on the needs of stakeholders. Now, all this you have already gone through. While discussing all this again, what we need to get ingrained is that when we say the process should be framed, that process should be given in your SAR. How did you go about doing it? How did you involve the stakeholders? When was the meeting held? You need to have that attendance sheet. You need to have a record for that. You need to have the minutes of the meetings. So all those iterations which you go through at different levels while framing your vision or your mission or your POs, that should be properly documented. Meeting records, even the refreshment record could be kept with you. Everything feasible which can prove that you actually went through it, because a number of institutes, they cook up data at a later stage. So the assessor would be on lookout for that kind of a scenario. You need to be having your documents in a proper shape so that you can convince them that this process was actually undertaken. Now, if you talk about criteria 2, it is about program, curriculum, and teaching learning processes. Program is basically the course for which you are going in for accreditation. For example, BTech in civil engineering. Now you need to document how the program curriculum was evolved, considering the program outcomes and the program specific outcomes which were defined earlier. Because we are talking about tier 1 here, this particular criteria becomes very important because you have autonomy to design your own program curriculum. You have full freedom to innovate. You have full freedom to go in for whatever latest changes can be done in both the curriculum as well as the way to deliver that. So this criteria is important for a tier 1 institute. It may not be that important for a tier 2 institute because their curriculum is basically centralized possibly by the affiliating university. So they have limited scope. They have limited scope of doing anything within that. But there, if you are a tier 2 institute, you have a fixed curricula, you can't really experiment, you can't do anything more beyond that. But you have one flexible aspect here which you can use. You can document that these things which are important, which needed to be done, but which were not part of the curricula, and we have no power to change it. But we have taken an initiative to go in for something which is called content beyond syllabus. And through that content beyond syllabus, we have been exposing our students to what should have been part of the curricula, but was not there due to no fault of us. So that way, you need to document what has been taught in terms of content beyond syllabus. The different methods for that could be, again, a teacher teaching or students being given seminars to present on those kind of topics, or expert lectures being arranged, or industrial tours to certain industries to expose them to latest technology. So there are umpteen methods in which you can go in for content beyond syllabus. That is something a tier 2 institute can do to circumvent any disadvantage of their having more flexibility in terms of curriculum modification. So what you need to do is that the structure of the curriculum should be defined in a proper way. You should have something which is called a course code, a course title, total number of contact hours, how many lectures, tutorials, or practicals, and the credits given to that course should be defined. So it should be grouped based upon the course components. Today we are looking at core part of the curriculum. Then electives are also given. There is an open elective concept also today, and students are encouraged that they choose electives from different fields of study. Then basic science, engineering science, humanities, projects, internship, all these are part of your curriculum. And there are certain indicative percentages also given by AICT that say 60% should be engineering science, 20% should be basic science, so much of elective should be there. So all those things should be adhered to by and large, but you definitely have certain flexibility in that also. within say 15-20% here and there, you can go in for. So you need to go in for your curriculum design, looking into all these aspects, as well as you need to see that whatever you are doing in your curriculum is compliant with the basic aim of attaining the POs and the PSOs. And how is it compliant? You need to articulate, you need to document that this curriculum would be helpful in attaining the POs or the PSOs. This component would be effective in achieving X, Y, or Z PO, or to what extent it would be there to comply with that particular PO. So every component of the curriculum would not be covering every PO, it won't be covering every PSO, but effectively every component should be at least touching some or the other PO or PSO, and you need to document that. Which course would be covering possibly 2 POs, 1 PSO, another course may be covering 4 POs, a couple of PSOs, so all that should be documented. Then program should include methods followed to improve quality of teaching learning processes, which may include adherence to academic calendar. Academic calendar is given very important, very large importance here, because academic calendar is considered to be some kind of a document which, if it is followed, means that the process of teaching learning is being rigorously followed, and there are likely to be better chances of compliance of a quality teaching learning process. So when you decide your academic calendar, you need to follow that also. And your course files, your documents should include the academic calendar, and you should be able to show to the visiting team that the dates given in the calendar have been followed. Instructional methods, different pedagogical initiatives, they should be taken care of. You need to document how did you go about teaching that curriculum which you have designed, what are the different methodologies used, what are the pedagogical tools which are used to deliver the content, different real-world examples, collaborative learning, the quality of laboratory experience, how were the students conducting the experiments, how were they recording observations, how was the data being analyzed, then remedial classes for weak students, encouragement for better students who are performing better. So all those things need to be properly documented under this criteria. You need to show how you were able to conduct your experiments, what was the batch size. Batch size, for example, 30 students or 20 students are going to the lab at a single time. You have only one setup. How would you justify that? So if you have 6, 7, 8 setups, you can say that, okay, groups of 2 or 3 were going in. So different, you have only one setup of equipment which is very expensive. So you need to have certain story behind it to justify and convince the visiting team that what you are doing is in consonance with the basic aim of conducting a proper teaching learning process so that the required outcomes can be met. So that documentation is part of this criteria. Then how do you choose who's weak? What do you do to help him? So that criteria should also be documented. How do you find out what is the base in which you can say that this is a bright student, this is a weak student, and the documents, the classes held for them, any remedial classes which were taken, which topic was taught, what was the time at which it was taken, so that all the record should be available. And that record should be put into this SAR under criteria 2. So your quality of your semester tests is again very important. You've done Bloom's taxonomy, different levels you have done, then higher order thinking, lower order thinking, all those things you've done in the previous 3 days. So your semester test should have quality which leads to justification that higher order learning levels are also assessed through your tests. It is not only describe this or write a note on this or what is this or define this. That kind of a paper would not be acceptable. So your semester test should be done through a quality test paper. Your assignment should be challenging. It should lead to application of mind. It should lead to actual practical utilization of the skills taught in that curriculum. And the evaluation should also be rational. So rubrics are a way in which certain courses or certain part of the your this thing can be evaluated where complete objectivity is not possible. Some subjectivity is there, some complexity is there in assessment. There you can use rubrics. That will bring some amount of objectivity in your evaluation process. For example, projects can be assessed through rubrics. Your lab work can be assessed through rubrics. Then you are also required to mention under this the initiatives, implementation details, and analysis of the learning levels related to quality of semester tests, assignments, and evaluation, and steps taken to ascertain the quality of projects in terms of processes related to project identification, allotment, continuous monitoring, evaluation, including demonstration of working prototypes, and enhancing the relevance of projects. So how do we go about it? You need to have possibly a departmental committee which will look at the project proposals by the students. They will see to it that there is no repetition. Projects which were done in the last 2-3 years are not repeated that frequently. Some changes there. You need to take care that the students would be able to apply their own minds while doing it rather than purchasing a project from somewhere and giving it. So make some changes. If they bring you a project using X methodology, change the method. Let the even if you are allowing the topic to be the same, so that you are able to make them do the work with their own hands. Then you need to have a committee which will continuously monitor. Project in charge or a guide could be there, but besides that, a centralized committee could be formulated, and its methodology should be on paper, and in part that should be included in the SAR under criteria 2. Then your assessment of the projects, midterm assessment, end sem assessment, how is it going about? How are you evaluating it? How are you monitoring it? Should be on paper. Then project lab should be there in the department, which is very important. Nowadays, most of the institutes looking at MBA, they have a project lab where working prototypes are displayed. Good projects with a small write-up can be put in that project lab. For the previous 2-3 years, for 3 years, you can retain those. And those projects should be available for the assessing team to see when they come. And if it is a good lab, it gives a good ambience to the department. So working projects, prototypes, they enhance the relevance. So that way you need to keep those projects with you. Try to fund the students so that sometimes they are not ready to, they've spent some money, they're not ready to give the project or put it in the department. Fund those projects. It makes no difference. But you keep those projects with the department so that the team can be shown those projects in the project lab. So another part which is important in criteria 2 is that we should be describing about the initiative related to industry interaction. This could be in terms of any lab you have established, which is through support of the industry. Certain industries, they fund labs in the institutes. Certain industries also give equipment for certain labs, or they can give support in any other way in terms of technical support or something. So you need to have certain initiatives wherein industry supported labs are there in your department, and how your program which is being accredited is getting any advantage out of that lab, that also needs to be documented here in criteria 2. Then you can invite industry experts to deliver some part of your curriculum or certain syllabus beyond your curriculum also. Certain content beyond curriculum also can be delivered by the industry experts. Then normally we send our students for industry internship or summer training. Departments or the institutes through their training and placement cell, they should try to have a scenario in which maximum students can be sent for industry internship through the institute. Excuse me. If they are sent through the institute, possibly a small stipend, then the industry also takes them seriously. The projects they are doing in the industry should also be properly assessed and documented. How are you monitoring that summer training or industry training? That also is a record which should be part of your criteria too. Next, we will go through criteria 3, which is course outcomes and program outcomes. How to formulate course outcomes, how to formulate program outcomes, that part you have done. So precise illustrations of mapping, program articulation matrix is basically mapping, and course articulation matrix, and how you are delivering the courses, what assessment tools are used, and the impact of course delivery, course content, and how lab and project work are contributing towards the attainment of COs, POs. It should be clearly outlined under criteria 3. So you need to mapping you have done, calculation of attainment you have done. Those calculations, those mappings, the tabular form of data should be part of criteria 3. You need to put substantial part in terms of demonstration of that particular thing being done in your institute. That should be given in your SAR criteria 3. So attainment, as you already know, for POs can be assessed either by direct methods or indirect methods. Direct methods we all know is by examination. Examination is your semester exams, in mid-sem exams, your end-sem exams, as well as the final exams. So all these are part of your direct assessment methods. So they are basically observation of students' knowledge or skills against measurable performance indicators, which can be directly measured. So here you need to take care that while framing your question papers, you should take care that you are actually putting questions from all parts of the curriculum so that you are able to assess the attainment of all the skills which you are trying to assess. So that is very important. Curriculum, individual questions, they need to be assessed, mapped, and those questions and the performance against them will tell you which PO is being or which CO is being met in terms of attainment by the student and where they are lacking behind. Now, indirect methods of assessment are basically through various surveys, through various self-reports or opinions taken from the students or the stakeholders. Rubrics is a useful tool for indirect assessment. It articulates the expectations for students' performance. It is basically a set of criteria for assessing students' work or performance. And it is particularly suited to POs that are complex and not easily quantifiable, for which there is no clear right or wrong answers, or which are not evaluated with standardized tests or surveys. So if you are trying to assess whether a student has good writing skills or good oral communication, or he has good critical thinking, for these kind of subjective things, you need to have the rubrics. So you need to put your rubrics, for example, a rubric for project evaluation, a rubric for labs. So all those rubrics need to be put into the SAR. You need to put those rubrics as part of the SAR, and you need to clearly state how that would be able to calculate the achievement of outcomes for that particular thing which that rubrics is developed to measure. criteria 4 basically is that the educational institution should monitor the academic performance of its students carefully. So the institution should provide the required information for 3 complete academic years. What about the sanctioned intake, how much admission took place, the success rate with and without backlogs in the stipulated period, academic performance of second and third year, placement, higher studies, professional activities. So they are all to be properly calculated, properly documented as per the format. So that is basically part of criteria 4. So we'll do it in detail also. But first, what we'll do is that we'll start with the pre-qualifier, then come to the SAR-H, basically. Is the screen visible?
No, sir. Not visible.
Sir, it's blank screen right now.
Blank. Okay, I'll just check.
Sir, are you sharing your screen again?
Yeah. ब्लैंक क्यों आ रही है?
सर अब दोबारा शेयर कीजिए, अब तो बिल्कुल ही चली गई।
अभी ब्लैंक है?
नहीं सर, अभी तो शेयरिंग ही बंद हो गई, अभी इट्स कमिंग अप। हाँ सर, अभी भी ब्लैंक है। सर आप शेयर विंडो कर रहे हैं या एंटायर स्क्रीन?
विंडो।
सर एक बार एंटायर स्क्रीन कर लीजिए, फिर इसीलिए इश्यू आ रहा है फुल स्क्रीन में।
एंटायर स्क्रीन में वो शेयर बटन ही नहीं खुल रहा।
हाँ सर, वो खुलेगा जब एक बीच में स्क्रीन आएगी ना, उसके बीच में भी एक छोटी स्क्रीन है, उस पर पहले क्लिक करेंगे तो वो इनेबल हो जाएगा शेयर वाला बटन।
वो तो ठीक है उसमें।
सर जैसे, हाँ सर अब आ रही है। इसको सर मिनिमाइज करके आप अपना वो चला लीजिए प्रेजेंटेशन।
प्रेजेंटेशन दिख रही है?
हाँ जी सर, विजिबल है PDF।
ठीक है। So this is your performer for pre-qualifiers. Before applying for NBA, you need to first assess your department whether it is meeting the basic requirements, and then only you can move forward. So pre-qualifier is first, this form is filled and it is then uploaded. How do you fill this form? You need only basic data initially, and certain basic things you need to take care of at this stage. First is you need to write the name of the program for which you are trying to get accreditation. For example, it could be BTech in Computer Science Engineering. You write the name of the program here, your college name, the year of establishment, its address, then name of the head of the institution and status of appointment, whether he's a temporary charge holder or he's a regular appointment. Then contact details of the head of the institution, name of the affiliating university. For most of the tier 1 institutions, this won't come into basically this won't be required except for autonomous institutes where they have full academic autonomy, but the degree is given by the affiliating university. And type of the institution, whether it is a deemed university, autonomous college, institute of national importance, that needs to be given. Ownership status, it is a state government institute, a central government, government aided, self-financing, a trust, a society, whatever. Then student admissions. This is basically at the institution level, not for the program only, for the whole institute. Sanction, intake, and the number of students actually admitted. So for the last 3 years, you need to do that. CA, Y is the current academic year, then -1, -2. You need to have the sanction. For example, you have a course, you have total sanction intake of 800 in the institute. So it would be 800, 800. For example, it was 720 in CAY M2. So it will be 800 plus 800 plus 720. That will be the total. Number of students actually admitted. That will be again filled here. And then for all 3 academic years, you need to take out the total admitted students over the sanctioned intake in terms of percentage of admissions you have. So then campus information is to be given. Does your college have its own building? Does it have a sports complex, a canteen, a hostel, a medical room, computer laboratories, counseling and guidance facilities, and a placement cell? You need to fill that data. Then names of programs offered by the college. How many courses are being taught by the college, both for UG and PG? So you can give this data department wise. For example, Department of Civil Engineering is offering a UG program in civil engineering and a PG program in, say, structural and soil mechanics. So you can list that. Similarly, for computer science, you have a UG program in computer science, a PG program in computer science, and a PG program in networking. So that list department-wise has to be given here. Then you need to list the programs to be considered for accreditation via this application. You may be looking at getting one program accredited, or you may be looking at getting multiple programs accredited, and that needs to be listed here. Now this particular sheet, part B, would be for one program. If you are having, say, 3 programs which you are going to go in for assessment, you need to have 3 different part Bs filled. So for example, you are looking at a particular program, BTech in civil engineering. So you will fill this proforma for civil engineering department, starting with B1, where you need to give the name of the department, Department of Civil Engineering. Then you need to name the programs running in the department. You may have 3 programs running in civil engineering, but in the 3rd column, you will write only the name of the program which is to be considered. if you want 2 programs in civil engineering to be considered, again you need to fill part B twice. So you will write Department of Civil Engineering, BTech in Civil Engineering, MTech in Structural Engineering, MTech in Soil Mechanics. Then you are applying for BTech in Civil Engineering. Third column would be BTech in Civil Engineering. Then year of starts in 1979. Initial intake, it started off with 60. Then you need to write. Today it is, say, having 120 students. In 1997, year of increase, you had 30 as the increase. So it became from 60 to 90. Then 2007, it becomes 90 to 120. You write 2007 and 120. Increase or decrease. Even if you surrendered some seats, that needs to be given. Then this change would be through AICT. So AICT approval letter number would be given. Then accreditation status has to be specified here. Whether you are applying for the first time, whether you were earlier granted provisional accreditation, or you were granted full accreditation, or you had a visit but you could not get accredited, or you withdrew in the exit meeting, or you were not eligible for accreditation so far and you are applying for the first time again, then eligible but not applied. All those things need to be given in the accreditation status. Then we come to student admissions program specific data now. Earlier it was for the institute. Now we are talking about student admissions for that particular program, like BTech in Civil Engineering. Sanctioned intake of the program in CAY, CAYM -1, -2, -3. So this particular data would be, it could vary. You may have increased or decreased the seats. You will accordingly write. Total number of students admitted in the first year, in the second row. Number of students admitted in the second year in the same batch while lateral entry. Polytechnic students come in through lateral entry, and that is given under N2, third column. Then number of students admitted in the program, N1 plus N2 would be taken. For example, you have a sanctioned intake of 120, 10% of students are admitted through lateral entry, 12, it becomes 132. So basically we are looking at admissions in the previous 3 years. CAY is there, but for calculation purposes, you need to pick up only data for CAYM in this particular table, -1, -2, -3. You need to add the total number of students admitted in the program divided by the sanctioned intake, and that will give you the percentage of students. How much percentage of admission is actually taking place in your institute. Then you need to give information of faculty. Name, the PAN number, the qualification, area of specialization, designation, date of joining, when were they designated as a professor or an associate professor, wherever they are a professor or associate professor. Are they currently in the department? Because data being given is for 3 years, so you need, if somebody is part of your department for 2 years and then he left, he will also come into this table, because he would at least be covering the requirements for the first 2 years. So currently associated or not, whether he's a regular or a contractual or an adjunct faculty, if contractual, whether it is a full-time contract or a part-time contract. Part-time contractual teacher would not be considered. And if that person is not associated any longer, whether he's left or not, you filled earlier, so date of leaving would be coming here, and if he's already is not left, you can write no here. Then the next table would be number of available. This table was about 3 years, so this is about available faculty for the last 2 years, current year and the last year. Here they will be looking at how many professors you have, how many associate professors you have, how many assistant professors, and how many of them are PhD. So you fill that for both UG and PG. For the why UG and PG, basically what he's trying to say is you will fill it for all the courses. Your department may be running 2 courses. Fill the total strength here. How many professors you have, how many associate or assistant professors you have. And take care that at least you have 2 professors or 1 professor and 1 associate professor for the department of the program under consideration. And head of department, his qualifications, name, whether he's a PhD or any other degree, but PhD is required. They make sure that if your head is not a PhD, before applying, change the head because PhD is required. Then student faculty ratio. Here you need to write the number of UG programs in the department, number of PG programs in the department, and you need to take the data of UG for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year. First year you can leave, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year, and the data for PG 1st and 2nd year. So number of students for each course. If you have 1 UG, 2 PGs, students for the UG program 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year, and PG program both the years for both the PG programs. That will help you to calculate the total number of students, which basically is the sanctioned intake plus any lateral entry. Then you will have total number of faculty members in the department minus those who are exclusively for first year. We are leaving out the students also and the faculty for first year also. So this will help us to calculate the student faculty ratio, total number of students of 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year plus PG, both the years, divided by faculty of PG as well as 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year of UG. So for 3 years you will have this, and then you will have the average student faculty ratio by adding these 3 figures divided by 3. Now earlier there was some stringency in terms of you having regular faculty, but now they have become a bit lenient. The change is that all faculty, whether regular or contractual, will be considered. The contractual faculty who have taught for 2 consecutive semesters in the corresponding academic year on full-time basis shall be considered. Part-time will not be considered, but full-time faculty, even if he is on contract or she is on contract, they'll be considered for calculation of the faculty student ratio. But that faculty member should be having AICTE prescribed qualifications, should be appointed on full-time basis, worked for consecutive 2 semesters, should have gone through appropriate process of selection. And that selection process in terms of advertisement, interview, experts being called, that record should be available and made available to the visiting team if required. So after filling this data, there are certain essential qualifiers which are to be filled in this table, whether you have vision, mission, and POs in place, whether they are stated in the prospectus and the website, are the POs of the program listed in the prospectus of the website. So all that you need to just tell here, whether it is done, compliance is there or not. Whether approval of the competent authority for programs under consideration has been obtained, which means that whether your program is AICTE approved or UGC approved, whatever your competent authority, you have to ensure that it was a approved program. Only then you can go in for accreditation. Whether admissions in the UG program is more than or equal to 60%. So whatever calculation we were doing, that is basically to ensure that we are meeting this criteria, that at least 60% admission average over 3 academic years is there. So even if for 1 year it may be less than 60, but if it is overall for 3 years the average is more than 60, you can go in for accreditation. You have 90% in 1 year, 80 in the next year, and 50 in the third. Overall you are more than 60, you are eligible. Whether faculty student ratio is better than or equal to 1:25 averaged over the last 3 years. That again would be to the SFR, which you calculated above. Whether at least 2 professors or 1 professor and 1 associate professor on regular basis with PhD degrees available in the respective department for the current and the last year. Where the number of available PhDs in department is greater than or equal to 20% of the required number of faculty average for the 2 years. So at least 20% of the required faculty. Required faculty, how do you come to? 1:25 is the ratio, which is the worst case scenario which they'll accept. So with that ratio, if you require say 20 teachers, at least 4 should be PhD. Whether 2 batches are passed out in the program under concentration, whether the HOD possesses PhD degrees for the program under concentration. So these are essential qualifiers. In your pre-qualifier, you need to meet all these 8 essential qualifiers. Then there are certain desirable parameters, whether the department has a program assessment and quality improvement committee. If it is there, what is its constitution and what is its mandate? Mandate means what does it do? What is it required to do? So that you need to document. Whether the department under concentration receives funds separately. They have separately earmarked funds for maintenance of laboratories. This is also important because when the team comes, they'll look closely at the budget. They'll look closely at whether you have a separate budget for maintaining your labs, whether you have separate budget for upgrading your labs, upgrading your facilities, whether you have a budget for setting up new labs. So they'll also check whether you have been utilizing that budget or not. The budget could be put by you on paper, but actual expenditure is not there, that goes negative. So not only should you be having a separate budget allotted, you should also be using that budget. So this is the pre-qualifier. Next we come to the SAR. Is the screen visible now, SAR?
Yes, sir, visible.
Visible. So what are the contents of the SAR? Part is institutional information. It is about your institution as a whole. Then part B would be the summary of the criteria, and you have 10 program level you have 7 program level criteria and 3 institution level criteria. So program level criteria, vision, mission, and program educational objectives was covered by Dr. Patnaik. We'll be looking at 2nd, 3rd, and 4th today. And the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, 9th, 10th would be taken up in the afternoon. So what is about the institutional information? Again, name, address, affiliating university, its name, the year of establishment, type of the institution. In case you are a deemed university or autonomous institute, mention the year of grant of status. Why it is to be mentioned? Because you need at least 1 batch to have passed out for assessment under tier 1. So that is why this particular thing is required. You need to have 2 batches passed out for accreditation as a general rule, but for a autonomous institute, at least 1 batch under autonomous status. Overall, at least 2 should have passed out. So there are certain institutes which are given academic autonomy by the university, the affiliating university. There they need to ensure that they have full academic autonomy within that university. If it is a UGC autonomy, it is understood that they have full autonomy, but if it is by only the affiliating university, then you need to indicate whether it is a full autonomy, because only a fully autonomous institute would be considered. Then ownership status, any other academic institution run by your trust or society or company. Sometimes the trusts, they're running numerous institutions, they may be running many engineering colleges, a medical college, a B.Ed college, or so many things. So those need to be mentioned here. Then all the programs being offered by the institution under consideration, they need to be listed here. Then your accreditation status, this is similar to what we filled in the pre-qualifier. So why this application, what are the programs which are to be considered? It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you require. Total number of employees, the data for that. First, under A, you have regular employees, both the faculty and the staff. Male and female, you need to segregate. Faculty in engineering, you need to segregate. Faculty in applied sciences and humanities, you need to segregate. And then the non-teaching staff, you need to segregate. So segregation is in terms of male, female, in terms of different engineering faculty or the science faculty or the non-teaching staff. And for the current year, in the last 2 years, you need to give this data. Maximum and minimum is that sometimes people join or sometimes people leave in between. So what was the maximum strength during that year and the minimum strength during that year? It could be like you have 115 faculty members minimum and you have 118 as maximum because 3 people left. So that is how it is filled. So again, you can consider both regular or contractual faculty, but it should be a full-time faculty, and contractual faculty should have been there for 2 full semesters with you. Then this was about, the earlier table was about the regular faculty. Contractual faculty data is given in B part. Here you have again the same segregations, male, female, faculty in engineering or sciences and humanities or the non-teaching staff. Then you need to give total number of engineering students, number of boys or number of girls, and then the total number of students for current and the last 2 academic years. Here, if you also have postgraduate programs in your institute, you can separately indicate, you can modify the table to indicate that this is the number of undergraduate and this is the number of postgraduate students, and then total. If you are also running, say, an MBA program or a MCA program or any other program which is non-engineering, then a separate table with the same details can also be included here for clarity purposes. Then vision of the institution and mission of the institute will come in this particular part. Contact information of the head of the institution would come here. And if somebody has been designated as an NBA coordinator, what is the purpose of NBA coordinator? He will be coordinating with the NBA and also with the team once they come. Basically, somebody who's appointment to go in for different administrative aspects while applying and discussing with the NBA. So if you have that person, you can name. Then you come to criteria summary. Name of the program comes first. You are applying for a program, write its name. Here program level criteria is listed with marks. 50 marks of the first criteria which you had covered. Then 100 marks is there for the second, which is program curriculum and teaching learning process, and course outcomes and program outcomes, 175 marks. So these 2 are very critical in terms of marks. They are among the heavyweights in terms of marks. And a good exercise done by you while preparing for NBA in terms of formulation of your POs, your COs, your curriculum, and your attainment. If you are able to do that process in a good way, you should be sailing through, because these are subjective also. Whether your whole methodology is right or wrong is something which some kind of a subjectiveness comes in, how that particular assessor is visualizing it. So a well formulated OB structure would be helpful. Then students' performance is criteria 4, which gives you 100 marks. Faculty information and contributions, 200 marks. 5th criteria, facilities and technical support, 80. Continuous improvement, 75. So you see that you learned that earlier also, that we have shifted from the input-output structure to the outcome-based structure. So facilities, the marks for that has comparatively reduced now. We are looking more at outcome, OB, and calculation of the outcome. So that is what is having the highest number of marks. So a good OB framework would go a big way in ensuring that you get accredited. Under the centralized or the institute level criteria, you have first year data, 50 marks, not very important in terms of marks. Then student support systems, 50 marks. Governance, institutional support, and financial resources, 120. So here your budgeting and all that, your BOG, your transparency in administration, the facilities being given to different stakeholders in terms of staff or students, so all that, the support given by the institution to send you for upgradation, for promotions, and all those things will be coming in. So vision, mission, I think I'll move forward because it was done exhaustively. We'll come directly to second. Program curriculum and teaching learning process. So program curriculum is over 30 marks. The most important part here is the process of designing the program curriculum. You can have a tabular process. The tabular form also can be used for defining how you are designing your curriculum, what are the inputs there. You need to put in your BOG constitution in this. What are the various inputs which or the thought processes which went into your mind while designing the program curriculum. This needs to be documented here. Whether your program curriculum is aligned with your POs and PSOs, that you need to demonstrate again. And structure of the curriculum in terms of course code, course title, lectures, tutorials, credits, total number of hours that has to be done. Seminars and project work is considered as practicals. And what are the different components of your curriculum? How much percentage of curriculum content is basic sciences, engineering sciences, electives, course, humanities, projects, internships. So all that you will put in here. Then you need to state the process used to identify the extent of compliance of curriculum for attaining the POs and PSOs. Here you need to show that your curriculum is competent enough to attain the POs and the PSOs. This again, all the mappings you have done so far have to be listed, and the process done, process details have to be stated in this. You need to show in a clearly demonstrable way how your POs and PSOs can be attained through your curriculum, and that the only way is through mapping. Then teaching learning processes. What are the processes which are followed to improve quality of teaching and learning? Here, adherence to the academic calendar, various pedagogical initiatives, instructional methods used, collaborative learning, which is basically group learning. How is your lab handled? You need to document all those things. What are the rubrics used in the lab? How are the lab experiments conducted? how are the students monitored, how is the data analysis done in your lab books. So how do you encourage your bright students, how do you assist your weak students, all that comes in teaching learning process, which has 15 marks. So what are the remedial classes which were taken, whether those classes were helping the students or not, any feedback regarding those remedial classes. So all those things are to be put in this. So basically, you need to put the implementation details as well as the impact analysis in this particular part. Then quality of end SEM exam. This is something which you need to ensure. Internal semester question papers, assignments and evaluation. Every course has a course coordinator. Possibly 3 teachers may be teaching a single course in your department. You need to have a course coordinator who will ensure that the question paper which is being given is of the required quality as per Bloom's taxonomy, whether your assignments or tests were challenging enough, whether complex engineering problems were given in that, whether analysis or application of mind was part of your evaluation. And you need to also ensure that there could be a committee at the central level also for the end SEM exams under your controller of exams, which would look at, possibly on a sampling basis, which would look at certain question papers coming from different departments and see that they also meet the requirements. So if you have those kind of initiatives done, you need to document them, you need to document the meetings, the minutes of those meetings, changes which came about, the observations of those committees. That will help the evaluators to understand that you are serious about the quality of your examination process. Then quality of student projects. So this is measured in terms of considerations like environment, safety, ethics, cost, type, standards. So process which you need to document is how did you identify the project, how did you allot the projects, how did you monitor those projects, evaluation of the projects. Evaluation, when you talk about, you need to put in the rubric used also in here. Then you need to look at the demonstration of the working prototypes and how they were useful to the society. So you also need to show that these projects and the process to actually develop those projects, how it was helpful in addressing various POs and PSOs, how it was able to help in attainment of POs and PSOs. That needs to be justified. And industry interaction, what initiatives you have taken. We were talking about industry attached labs, we were talking about content beyond syllabus or content within the syllabus being delivered partially through industry. Then industrial visits becomes part of this particular thing. You take your students for industrial visits. Then you can also have certain exhibitions of industrial products. You either go to those exhibitions with your students or have those exhibitions within the institute. So all those initiatives which you take, they have 10 marks basically, and they need to be recorded in this. Then initiatives related to industry internship and summer training. Whether internship is being organized through the college or directly by the students, any stipend being taken, how is that internship being monitored? What is the process of monitoring the internship in terms of the student actually learning something there, the student actually going there or just bringing a certificate? So all those things are part of your internship. Then you need the part of your evaluation of internship, at least a major part of it should be by the industry people, and how they are actually reacting to your students' performance, that should be documented. Then establish the third criteria is course outcomes and program outcomes. Here you need to establish the correlation between the courses and the program outcomes and the program specific outcomes. So course outcomes finally would lead to achievement of program outcomes, and that correlation needs to be shown in this. So matrix which you've done earlier also can be found for that, wherein all POs can be mapped with the COs of every course. So if you have a course and say you have 6 COs and you have 12 POs, or you can also have a separate, or within this you can add columns for PSOs also. Say you have 3 PSOs, you can add within this, or you can have a separate thing also. So that matrix needs to be done. And within this matrix, you need to show the correlation level in terms of 1, 2, or 3, which shows 1 is low, 2 is medium, and 3 is high correlation. And attainment calculation is 75 marks. Under this, you need to first describe the assessment tools and processes used to gather data. So you would have already by now learned that there are different assessment tools. There are certain direct assessment tools, there are indirect assessment tools. Direct assessment tools are something like semester end exams, mid-sem exams, your laboratory exams. So all those things are part of your direct assessment tools. And indirect assessment tools are basically your surveys of different kinds. At the end of the course, at the end of the program, exit survey, then you need to have certain surveys which are from the employers also, what the student has worked for a couple of years. So all those things are part of your assessment. And you have certain rubrics also which will help you to assess certain things which are not directly accessible in terms of marks, in terms of a test. So all these attainments of the course outcomes for all the courses have to be documented. All the tables have to be put into the SAR. So all the course outcome attainment levels have to be documented in this criteria 3. Then once you have calculated the course outcomes, you can go in for attainment of program outcomes and program specific outcomes. Here you describe the assessment tools for measuring the attainment of each PO and PSO. What are the tools you have used? That needs to be documented. Then how did you go about measuring through those tools? That you need to document here. Here you need to ensure that each course would be giving some amount of contribution to the attainment of the PO. You need to calculate all that also. These are the matrices which normally are developed for calculating the attainment. Criteria 4 is basically documenting the performance of the students, and it has 100 marks. So here you need to give information regarding the sanctioned intake for the current year and the last 2 years. Total number of students admitted in the first year minus the number of students who migrated to other programs or institutes, plus the number of students migrated to this program. For example, if you have a sanctioned intake of 120, so in the second column you had say 120 as the full admission, 5 of them migrated out, 2 migrated in, so it becomes 170. Then number of students admitted in the second year through LEAT will be also put here, and separate division students normally is something which is not there, whatever it is. So all these 3 will be part of your total number of students admitted in the program. Once you have calculated that, you will then go in for calculation of the results. So in the second table, we will be looking at data for the current academic year, -1, -2, -3. And Number of students who have successfully graduated without backlogs in any semester year of study. So you need to put in the data for the total number of students, which is N1 plus N2 plus N3, who have graduated without backlog in any semester or year of study. So they should be having no backlog even within the semester. And they have passed out in a completely clean way. That data is given here. The students admitted in the current academic year would not be having this assessment. For -1, you will have a first year only. For -2, you have 2 years they have passed through. For -3, you have 3 years they have passed through. And beyond that also, you will be asked to have data for the next 3 batches, which would be those students who have completed their study. So this was about students who have graduated without any backlog at any stage in any semester. And next table is about those students who were able to pass out within the stipulated 4 years. They may be having a backlog or they may not be having a backlog, but they completed their degree within 4 years. So this table is documenting that. So this table is basically giving you an example. Sanction intake was 120, 100 students were admitted. There was no late admission. 100 admitted would include those migrating out and migrating in. And the total comes to 124. In the first column, 124, then 134. Here, in fact, he's not put, he's added 24 here, but he's shown nil in the lead column. So basically it is, he wanted to show it as 24 here. So it will come to 124 each. And in the third year, he's shown 10 more in the admitted category. That becomes 134. So in the first year under 100, he says that number of students who have successfully graduated without backlog in any semester. There was no paper exam for the current admission, but in the year before that, 60 students, he's trying to say, graduated out of 124 without any backlog in any semester. So they were able to complete the first 2 semesters without any backlog. In the next year, 50 in the first year and 60 in the second year. Similarly for the other years also. So this is about the total number of pass outs without backlog, again documented here. Then enrollment ratio. That is N1 over N. Students enrolled in the first year level on average basis during the previous 3 academic years, starting from the current academic year. So if you are able to have 90% or more enrollments or admissions, so this is not considering the lead. It is only considering sanctioned intake and the first year admissions. If you have 90% and above admissions, you get 20 marks straight off, 80, 18 and so on. So this is how admissions, a good admission record will give you more marks. Then we come to the success rate in the stipulated period of program. Success rate without backlogs in any semester year of study. It can be calculated giving you 15 marks based upon the performance success index. Number of students who have graduated from the program without backlog, divided by the number of students admitted in the first year of that batch and actually admitted in the second year while late. So average success index would be mean success index of the past 3 batches. So this is about graduating students. last year of graduate -1, last year of graduate -2. So those who were in final year last year, those who were in final year 2 years ago, and those who were in final year 3 years ago. This is the data of those previous 3 passed out batches basically. So that data will help us to calculate the success index. So you have your first row in which students admitted in the first year is added, and those admitted while late is added. And in the second, those who graduated without backlogs in the stipulated period, that is added. Dividing these two will give you the success index for the last 3 years for each year separately. Second, this was about no backlog at any stage. Next would be that we'll be using the data which we were preparing in the table earlier, which was about success rate in completing within the stipulated period of study. Here you can have backlogs in between, but you need to pass out within those 4 years. Again, for the last 3 graduating years, this data will come and you will calculate your success index and the average success index. So if 100% students clear without any backlog, then the total marks scored will be 20. So next table is about the academic performance in the second year. 10 marks for that. Academic performance in the second year is average academic performance index, which is the mean of the second year grade point average of all successful students on a 10-point scale, or the mean of the percentage of marks of all successful students in the second year divided by 10, or into the number of successful students divided by the number of students appeared in the exams. So this is the table which will be for second year students. So mean of CGPA for the 3 years, -1, -2, -3. It could be mean of CGPA or the mean percentage of all successful students, only passing out students. Then total number of successful students would be Y. Total number of students appeared would be Z. So this would be X into Y by Z for 3 years. So your X says if your mean CGPA is 7, number of successful students is 50, and the total who appeared is 100, it would be 7 into 50, that is 350 divided by 100. So that would be your API. And you can calculate the API for 3 years and average it out. Then next data is about placement, higher studies and entrepreneurship. 30 marks for this particular point. This would be calculated in terms of total number of final year students over, and second column is number of students placed in companies or the government sector, X, number of students admitted to higher studies with valid qualifying scores, and the number of students turned entrepreneur in engineering technology. So this would be X plus Y plus Z divided by N. Placement index P1, P2, P3, and you can calculate the average placement, which will be multiplied by 30 to give you the marks for this. So you see that all these 3, your claim would not be accepted on face value. You need to have your files ready, showing proof of the students being placed. If you want to apply for accreditation, start calculating or start collecting these proofs, because this is very important. It is very difficult to collect the record. Placement record normally you have in terms of campus placement. Off campus, you need to collect from the students. Then passing out or those taking GATE exams, and you need to be very careful that when the student is in final year, you collect all that data. For those batches which have already gone away, put a person in job to collect this data, because the response rate from the students who passed out in giving proofs and all is sometimes slow. You need to persuade them. Now, hello. Then number of students who turned entrepreneur, again proof is required here. That file would be seen and only then marks would be given. So this is the placement data in terms of student name, then employer, enrollment, appointment letter, reference. So this is what I was talking about. This has to be put into this. Then professional activities, whether you have any professional society chapters and organizing engineering events, whether you are publishing a technical magazine, newsletter in your department. So if you don't have a professional society, if you are an electronics department, open a chapter of IET. If you are a mechanical department, you can have a SAE chapter. So have your own professional societies within the department and see that those are functional. And participation in inter-institute events for students. All these things require proof. Newsletters, magazines, you may have a magazine at the college level, keep that as a record. Newsletter you can always have within the department also every 3 months or so, and it could be e-newsletter. You can have easy 5 marks with that. Inter-institute events, whenever students go out anywhere for any kind of event, keep the proof, keep the file ready. So this is about criteria 4. I think with that, we have also overshot our time, and we can now finish the any query, any question if somebody wants to ask, they can go ahead, otherwise we will finish the session.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. Very nice presentation, sir. So I'm having some queries in the criteria number 4.
Yeah.
In criteria number 4, that professional activities. No?
Yeah.
So that professional societies or the chapters and the organizing engineering event. Suppose college organizes events only, means webinar type. So shall we get the point? So not related to the other societies, but the department only organizes the activities like webinar. So shall we get that point?
This particular thing should be aligned to what the students are going to do. So when we talk about professional society activities, this was a criteria 4 is about student activities. So how the students involved in that webinar, you need to document that, whether they attended it, whether they learned something from it. You can have feedback forms. So it will be useful, no doubt, but it should be student centric also.
Yeah. Means that if the students attended that webinar in our department or the other colleges,
then you can keep that record. That will be helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
There is a question in the chat box. Private universities, departments, those intake does not define how they apply MBA. What you are trying to say is that they keep on expanding or contracting their intake? That is what you are trying to say, if I am right?
Intake seats, sir. Intake seats.
Intake seats. Then they need to somehow freeze that also. You are right. If the current trend is for CSE, they'll fill up 5,000 CSE students. But then they need to show, while applying, they need to put in their seats. The 5,000 would be the intake they have. They need to show the facilities, the faculty, the activities which are able to match with those 5,000 students. If they had, on paper, they showed they had 500 intake in the first year, -3 in the next year, it was 800 in the third year, it was 1,000. Accordingly, all the parameters would vary and they need to show proof for having met with those requirements. They may change their seats, but the underlying principle is that everything they do should be matching the AICTE requirements. So if we are
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, we had applied for accreditation and we got it in 2018. And now our accreditation is finishing on June 2021.
Okay.
So now we have to again reapply for accreditation.
Yeah, you need to, if you had there is something called a compliance report also.
If we give the compliance report, then when do we have to submit that compliance report? Because we are finishing on June 2021.
You need to submit it by now. Kindly do it.
By June.
Yeah.
Before the June end, we should give the compliance report.
You should give it by June.
So then they will give you accreditation for how many years then? We got last for 3 years.
It depends. Normally they may go in for a revisit.
They will come for revisit.
Yeah, that is normally done. Very rare that they will give it directly. Maybe due to pandemic, they may be giving certain additional time, but normally it is a revisit.
Okay, and we have all defined our vision and every mission statements, PEOs, and everything is all defined by the last, because we have done it in 2018. So that should remain the same only, no, sir?
Unless depending upon your performance attainment, this, that, vision mission normally has to be same. It can't be changed every day.
Correct. And the PEOs and everything?
They should also be
Specific program, PSO?
They should be long term, but some tweaking here and there could be there in terms of any change scenario which you need to justify, or based upon any kind of attainment feedback or from the employees feedback. Those changes would be at a lower level. At a higher level, within 3 years, change isn't really required.
Sir, PSO is program specific objective. That is, after 3 years, the student will be what student is gaining. Hai na, sir? After 3 years.
After 4 years, rather.
3 to 4 years.
Students have passed out. You get certain kinds of feedback from their employers, from them. Then you can look at a change. Not
right. So that is PSOs, and PEOs is.
PEOs are fixed.
They are looked when.
POs are common for all courses, no?
For all courses. So PO, so PEO, triple word.
Yeah, PEO is something which you define based upon aligning with your vision and mission.
Right. Okay. So, 12 POs are given by AICTE, which is common for all the engineering students. PSO is for specific civil engineering or electronics.
You can add 2-3 specific to your program.
Correct. And PEO is that is also common to the college.
That is for your college, and that is something which should be aligned with your mission and vision.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Very nice presentation, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir, so much.
Okay, then thank you. I think you can have a small break, and then Professor Srinivas will be taking up the next session.